Tonight we're going to be studying beginning in chapter 23 and in verse 25. However, so I've got up here 24 and 25 chapters are going to be the heart of the situation. Now, we are in the third lesson in the introduction to the minor prophets. When you talk about the introduction of the minor prophets, that means that you have to go back and study at least the last portion of 2 Kings. And if you wanted to get a good introduction to the minor prophets, it means that you have to go back the way that we have in this class and start out and study all those things up to this point. Because that will help us to understand those things. Now, the reason I say you go to the latter part in here, though, this is where you begin to run across those prophets that God Himself has set out, the minor prophets that we have been talking about in various ways. Back in chapter 14 and down in 21, that's where we started, where we talked about, there's where you come in to Amos and Hosea and such men as that. Now then, tonight we pick up our story, and we're going to conclude this now. We will finish 2 Kings tonight. All right, as we look at this, we go back and we review just briefly. Here we have Israel. Hoshea was the last king. Shalmaneser was the king of what country? Assyria. And it came down and conquered them and brought the Jews up, spread them throughout Assyria, and then they just disappeared. This happened in the year 722 BC. Then we find that, as we read in 2 Kings, that only the tribe of Judah was left. We picked up our story with Hezekiah, Manasseh, and Ammon. Hezekiah was a good king. Manasseh and Ammon were horrible kings. And then Josiah came along. And he's the one that we studied about this last week then. Josiah was really the last chance for them. And we studied about his restoration. Now, Josiah's restoration failed. As we looked last week, we saw all of those good things that he did. And how he went out and he tore down all of the altars. He kicked out all the priests. He took out everything that shouldn't be in there. And then he put in everything that should. Now you say, how could you call that a failure? Well, in his lifetime, it was not a failure. While he was alive, everything went along great. But, as we'll see, his restoration was a failure because he could control their actions but not their minds. While he was the king, he could tell them, you're going to do this. And the Jews did do it. So they had a restoration movement while Josiah was alive. But it never took with their minds. The mind of the Jewish people always had that idolatry enhanced within it. We find that Hosea, now would Hosea have been preaching at this time or before this time? Remember your first two prophets that came on were Hosea and Micah. They came on and preached to Israel. Okay, Hosea says this, my people ask counsel at their stocks, that is the wooden stocks, and their staff declare it unto them. In other words, the wooden pole, they use that as their god. For the spirit of whoredoms has caused them to err. The spirit of whoredoms, that's what I'm getting at. These people are indoctrinated with the spirit, with an attitude of whoredom. Now, when he says whoredom, he means that God should be their God, their husband, but these people go after other gods in order to get their pleasure. And so he calls it then a spirit of whoredom. Again he said, they will not frame their doing to turn unto their God, for the spirit of whoredoms is in the midst of them, and they have not known the Lord. So it's the attitude, the disposition. So you can take an attitude, a disposition of people, and you can force them to change at gunpoint, but what happens when you take your gun away? Then they're going to go back to the old ways. 2 Kings 23, then, we find as a result of this, that down in verse 27, and the Lord said, I will remove Judah also out of my sight, as I have removed Israel. And I will cast off this city, Jerusalem, which I have chosen, and the house which I said, my name shall be there. So God now has promised, even though these people have done this, they've got this spirit of whoredom, they've got this attitude within them, And God said, I'm going to do the same thing to Judah that I did to Israel. And that's what we're going to see tonight is really going to happen. Now, as he talked about cast off that house, let's remember this right in here would be the tent of meeting that we came in contact with back at Mount Sinai when when God told Moses, build this tent of meeting in this way. Later on, when Solomon came along, Solomon took the same dimensions, the same thing, and he put it in a permanent fashion, and then they began calling it the temple. Now, God said, I'm going to destroy this temple. The temple that's in Jerusalem, I'm going to destroy Jerusalem itself. Now, we've already seen here, as we take a look at Josiah, that 57 years before Josiah, we studied last week, Isaiah had told Hezekiah, he said, behold, the days come that all that is in thy house, and that which thy fathers have laid up in store unto this day, shall be carried into Babylon. Nothing shall be left, saith the Lord. So he's given this promise that you're going to be carried into Babylon. Now, at that time, we talked about who is really ruling the world in Hezekiah's day. Was it Babylon? No, it was Assyria. And yet he says it's going to be carried away into Babylon. Babylon's going to come over and get you. Babylon will bring you back. You're going to be carried off into Babylon. Now, as we look here at the lineage of David, we've seen that the house of Israel's done away, and you have the lineage of Christ coming through the kings of Judah. See, they're coming down there. So now we're getting down here to a situation then where it's getting pretty important. We've already seen about these prophets. We saw that the first prophet that came on the scene was Jonah. He preached to whom? Assyria. See, up at Nineveh. Then we had Amos and Hosea preaching to Israel. Then we had Isaiah and Micah preaching to Judah. And then we have Jeremiah and Zephaniah preaching to Josiah and on down through the line. So who might you think that I would bring up as a prophet tonight in class? Jeremiah. See, we're going to bring him up, and you can see why. See, he will be living at this time. Now, as we take a look here at the chronology of the kings, then, to put it in perspective, there we've learned that Israel was gone, and now tonight we start out with Jehoahaz. Now, over there, Zedekiah, we'll get to him in a little while, will be the last king in Judah. But we start out now tonight with Jehoahaz. So let's look at Jehoahaz, and he is down here in verse 31 of chapter 23. It said, and Jehoahaz was 20 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 3 months in Jerusalem, and his mother named it, and so forth. 32, he did that which was evil in the sight of Jehovah, according to all his fathers had done. And Pharaoh Necho. Now, who would Pharaoh Necho be? When you talk about a Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. That's right. So now, Pharaoh Necho has come up and conquered them. Not Assyria, not Babylon, but Pharaoh Necho has come up and conquered Israel or Judah at this particular time. All right, so he then comes up and he puts a tribute or a tax of 100 talents of silver on them, and then it said Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim, the son of Josiah, king in his stead and so forth, and changed his name to Jehoiakim. That's how we get Jehoiakim. Jehoiakim is the son of Josiah. And so he took Josiah away, and he came to Egypt, and down there he died. So Pharaoh Necho, Egypt, is conquering now. Not a big thing, but I just want you to note that Israel, Judah that's here, kind of vacillates back and forth, don't they? In other words, over in here, Assyria comes down and gets them. Egypt comes up and gets them. Back and forth they go between these two mighty powers. Now, it's kind of interesting. When you have those two mighty powers, you have up here Assyria at the north, you have Egypt down here, both world rulers, both fighting each other, going back and forth. It's kind of unique that by this time they haven't eaten up Israel, isn't it? They just digested them. but they haven't. So Judah is still down there, and they've got that. Now then, in chapter 24, then we come to Jehoiakim now. So we change kings, and as we come to Jehoiakim, now then, we're going to be coming to Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar is going to come down and get Jehoiakim. So let's notice. And in his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him. Now, before we go any farther, as you look here at Jehoiakim and King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, Nebuchadnezzar is king of what country? Babylon. But Assyria has been ruling up to now, haven't they? Okay, let's look to see what happened in between this time. Right before this happened, some unique things happened up in there in this kingdom that is not dealt with in the Bible. It's dealt with in secular history. Now, way back here, Hammurabi, who lived 1,700 years, it'd be 1,000 years before we are, he had this area in here. But Nebuchadnezzar, he's conquered all of this gray area, the whole thing that goes around. That's what he has conquered. But now, when we last left off, who was ruling the world? Assyria was ruling the world. Okay, now up here we got Assyria. What's the capital of Assyria? Nineveh. Down here we have Babylon, just a little nation. All right, as you look at it down here, Babylon and the Medes over there got in a war one with the other. Back in those days, if you weren't doing anything, you just, well, go have a war. So they fought one with another and tried to expand their kingdoms out and doing this. So they got in a war one with the other. Now, while they were fighting, one day at noon, it became totally dark. Just became totally dark for a few minutes, 20 minutes or so. It was an eclipse of the sun. And astronomers today can go back and they can figure out the exact year, and it coincides, and that's how some of these things that you can tell back there. But now, you go back there, and I think it was about 706, something like that, and they had that total eclipse. Now, in those days, what did those heathens think any time that anything happened? If a bird flew south. It's an omen. It's God telling us something. So, this right here became totally dark, and they then concluded, God is telling us we shouldn't fight. So, King Nebuchadnezzar's dad is ruling at this time. His name is Nabopolassar. You don't have to remember that. But he's ruling. So he goes over to the king of Mede, and he said, we're not supposed to be fighting each other. We should join our armies. So they made an agreement. When they made an agreement to seal it, so neither one of them will break it, how did they do it? You know? Your son marry my daughter. In other words, we've got to have an intermarriage relationship. So they had that marriage, and they put it together, and now then, those guys now have a bigger country all of a sudden. These two armies come together, and they become one. All right, so now you got Babylon and the Medes, one big army that's in here. All right, at this time, you have Egypt, who's come up, and they're going to conquer Assyria. So they come up here, and they're headed into Nineveh. The army of Assyria goes over here to meet them, right over here before they get in. And when the army goes over there, the Babylon and the Medes get up there and grab Nineveh and take over Assyria. And so now, Babylon, which being the stronger, is going to be the ruler. So all of a sudden, we now have Babylon that is ruling the world here. All right, now as he's ruling the world, his dad, Nabopolassar, sends his son, General Nebuchadnezzar, down here. He said, take the army, go down and conquer these people, head down in toward Egypt. So Nebuchadnezzar is the son, and he's the general of the army, and he's off on an expedition. All of a sudden, he hears about his dad back over here at Babylon who died. So he takes off and heads straight across the desert and goes over to take the kingship of Babylon. Now, why do people not go across this desert? See? It's because it's so treacherous you can't make it. Well, Nebuchadnezzar, wanting that kingship so bad, he sent his army back up and said, I'll meet you over there. but I'm getting over. And he got over there in time to get the kingship. So now then we've got Nebuchadnezzar, who is the king of Babylon. So that's why we can read here in this passage in here then about Jehoiakim and so forth. And so it says he came down and he conquered then these people, and see if there's anything that's really important in here. Look in verse 3. It says, surely at the command of Jehovah came this upon Judah, to remove them out of their sight for the sins of Manasseh. So God is punishing them for doing this thing. So then you get down to verse 6. Jehoiakim slept with his fathers, and Jehoiachin started ruling. So now you have Jehoiachin in verse 8. So let's look at it then in this way. Jehoahaz ruled. Pharaoh Necho ruled him. Then in 606, Nebuchadnezzar came down, and in chapter 24 and verse 1, and conquered Jehoiakim and Judah. Now, I want us to note there's going to be 3 captivities that are going to take place. This is the first one. In chapter 24 and verse 1, out by your side there in your margin, write down 606 BC, because that's when he came down and conquered him. Now, when he came down and conquered him, the way he did it was he just came down and conquered him, and then what did people want when they conquered a nation? What did one nation want when they conquered another nation? Yeah, pay me taxes. I've got to set up a tax situation here, so give me a big chunk right now, and then I'm going to put you on a yearly basis of payment, and you pay me. And so that's what it was. So he left the people there, and he set them up on this tax basis now. All right, now that's in 606 BC. All right, now then, down in verse 8 in here then, why we find the second captivity that takes place. And at this time, it is Jehoiachin that is in office. Now, they rebel against Babylon, don't pay their taxes and so forth, and so down he comes. All right, Jehoiachin tells you in verse 9, he did that which was evil. Verse 10, at that time the servants of Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came up to Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. And Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came into the city while his servants were besieging it. And Jehoiachin, the king of Babylon, went out to the king of Judah went out to the king of Babylon, he and his mother and his servants and princes and his officers. And the king of Babylon took him in the 8th year of his reign. So now, this time, the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, said, I'm taking you with me. See, the king. Now, not only am I taking you with me, but look at what else he took. And he carried out thence all the treasures of the house of Jehovah, and the treasures of the king's house, and cut in pieces all the vessels of gold which Solomon king of Israel had made in the temple of Jehovah, as Jehovah had said. And he carried away all Jerusalem, and all the princes, and all the mighty men of valor, even 10,000 captives, all the craftsmen, and the smiths. None remained, save the poorest sort of the people in the land. So, at this time, then, when he comes down, here he gets this, and he takes away all of the valuable things. He takes away the kings, the princes, the mighty men, the valuables they had. He takes away the craftsmen and the smiths. That is all skilled labor. Now, what did he take the first time? Just gold and taxes. This time he comes down and he takes all of the people that really amount to anything, and he just left the poorest of the people that's back there. So he took all the skilled labor away. Now, when he took all the skilled labor away, that will pretty well cripple this nation so that it cannot rise again. Isn't that the way we would think? Okay, that's what he does then at this time, and this is in 596 BC that he does this. 596 BC. The other was 606. So there's about this 7-year period of time then that is in there. Okay. Now, when he takes him away, then we come down to verse 17. And the king of Babylon made, I can't even read this, I got some writing over it, Jehoiachin's father's brother, that is his uncle, king in his stead, and changed his name to Zedekiah. So now then, we have a new king. And that is, here we have a king named Zedekiah. By the way, before we do this, as I've got up here, the reason I put my charts up so it'll remind me, as you look at Jehoiachin, he is called Jeconiah. Over in 1 Chronicles, remember where you can go to the Chronicles and read it? Over in 1 Chronicles and in Jeremiah, chapter 24 and verse 1. Now, why would I bring up Jeremiah? Why would Jeremiah be talking about this guy? He's a prophet at this time. So they call him, then, Jeconiah. And they describe it, the son of the same guy and so forth. There's no doubt about it. So he changed his name to Jeconiah. Later, he's going to be called Coniah. We're going to take the J-E off of it, and he'll just be called Coniah when we get to it in just a little while. And that Coniah probably is a very derogatory name, as I will point out to you when we get to it. But I just want you to note, this guy has three names. See? Jehoiachin, Jeconiah, and Coniah. That's going to be the three names. Now, in reality, the only name that you need to emblazon on your mind is the last one, Coniah. And you'll see it in just a little while why this is true here. So, here then we have Jehoiachin. Now, he takes Jehoiachin off into captivity. When he takes him off into captivity then, he is going to, well, let's see, I'm not ready for that yet. I've somehow right here, okay, I was thinking I put in something else. Okay, let's do this. He's getting ready to put in Jeconiah, Zedekiah. But before we study Zedekiah, let's go ahead and do it here the way I put it in the chart here. I was thinking that I reversed it and put it in another way. Now, here it is that we have this guy, Jeconiah. Now, turn over to Jeremiah. As you turn over to Jeremiah, he's going to be speaking here, and if you want to look in 24 and it's that's not it, is it? Yes, it is. After Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar being carried away. Yeah, it's in yeah, that's it. Okay, in verse 1, Jeconiah, that's there. Now, I want you to skip back though to chapter 22. Here is a major chapter. We're going to learn something really important right here. Now, I don't want to get in much detail as we go through, and don't want you to try to remember a whole lot of things that are in here. But if you started out in chapter 22 down in verse 10, Jeremiah is crying out about Josiah. In verse 11, Jehoahaz. In verse 13, Jehoiakim. And then down in verse 15, Josiah here again. Then you get down to 24. And here's where I want to start. Down in 24, here it is, it says, "As I live, saith Jehovah, though Coniah," now this would be Jeconiah, see, "though Coniah, the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, were the signet upon my right hand, yet would I pluck thee thence." What does the signet upon my right hand mean? It's your authority. It's the most important thing that you've got. You've got your ring, you've got your signet, you put a stamp on it, and it shows you have authority. In other words, even though he's the most precious thing that I possess, God said, I'll tear him down. In other words, he is going to come down. Now, this is Jeremiah preaching against Coniah. "And I will give thee the hand of them that seek thy life, and into the hand of them of whom thou art afraid, even the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and into the hand of the Chaldeans, So Jeremiah is saying, God says, I'm going to give you into the hands of these people, Nebuchadnezzar and the king of Babylon and the Chaldeans. Now, what do we mean by Chaldeans? We've studied, we've seen the Assyrians, we've seen the Babylonians, and now then he puts the Chaldeans in there. Chaldea is the name of that country where Babylon and the Medes and the Persians and all that is. That's Chaldea. It's kind of like if you'd say, I'm going to have you to be conquered by the United States, the Americans will conquer you, and you will be run by North America. Well, when you say North America, what's the difference in America and North America? There's a lot in the way we use it, isn't there? We use America as the 50 states, but North America is Canada and the 50 states also here. So Chaldea is the name of that country that's over there. But Babylon is the ruler of the country now. And I will cast thee out, and thy mother that bare thee, into another country where ye were not born, and you shall die. This is Coniah. But to the land wherein their soul longeth to return, thither shall they not return. You're never going to come back again. Is this man Coniah a despised, broken vessel? Now this is a rhetorical question. He doesn't expect an answer. The way he's been preaching, everybody knows it. He is. Now, is he, in here, this man Coniah, a despised, broken vessel? Is he a vessel wherein none delighteth? Wherefore are they cast out, he and his seed, and are cast into the land which they know not? O earth, 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 hear the word of Jehovah. Now that's quite a plea, isn't it? That he cries out for the whole earth. Earth, 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 hear the word of Jehovah. Write this man childless, a man that shall not prosper in his days, for no more shall a man of his seed prosper, setting upon the throne of David and ruling in Judah. Now, let's break this down. Here it is that he says, he cries out, O earth, 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 hear the word of Jehovah. Write this man childless. Just write him off as though he doesn't have any kids. His posterity not going to count any longer in this kingship. A man, now note here, a man that shall not prosper in his days. Now I want you to know what I put there in red. For no man of his seed shall prosper, setting upon the throne of David and ruling any more in Judah. Now, the important thing for us to see is this. That is that here we have Jehoiachin or Coniah right here. And he said, write him childless. And there he says something about strike him childless. Listen to this in here. Jesus Christ is the seed of Coniah. Right out there. Now, Jesus Christ is of the seed of Coniah. Therefore, he cannot sit on the throne of David and do what? Prosper in Judah. It's very important. Yeah, that's what they're looking for. And that's what all of these millennialists are looking for today. That Jesus is coming back. And when he comes back again, where is he coming back to establish his throne? In Jerusalem, right there in Judah. Set it up and rule the world. What did Jeremiah say? He said, from Coniah on, never again will any of his seed, and Jesus is one of his seeds, be able to sit on the throne of David and rule in Judah. Now, does Jesus Christ sit on the throne of David? Yes. Way back there, if I'd have drilled it in you harder and harder and harder and harder. I tried to make a point. Remember the throne of David, and then when Solomon took it, it's the throne of Solomon, and Solomon sat on the throne of David, and then the throne of David was the throne of God, and when Solomon sat on the throne of David, he sat on the throne of God, and when he sat on the throne of God, he sat on the throne of David. I went back and forth like this, but you didn't realize the importance of it at that time. But you go back and get your notes, and now then you're going to see it. And that is Jesus sitting on the throne of God today? Yeah. He's sitting on the throne of God. Is he sitting on the throne of David? Yeah. See? But what's the key? Is he prospering today? Yeah. Everything's going his way. But what's the key? He cannot sit on the throne of David and prosper where? In Judah. See? He's in heaven. He can't do it in Judah. But what does the world today say? What is it they want? Him to come back and do it in Judah. The Lord said it will not happen. See? You see why I say it's an important point for us to see? Dave? Yeah. It goes right on, and the Jews kept track of it, and it goes right on, and you have your genealogy in Matthew 1. Yeah. Yeah. What's that? Yeah. Yeah, but he's not going to sit on the throne in Judah. See, that's the key. So just mark him off. He's childless. Not going to do any good. To a Jew, when you say he's childless, it's different than somebody today. Yeah, two people get married today and they don't have any kids. We're childless. Well, no problem. Right? But what if your whole life depended on your lineage going on? See? Then your life is wrapped up in your children. See? And so from here on, whatever kids he has, just strike them off. It's as though he doesn't have any kids. So just wipe him off in there. Well, that's a pretty powerful argument. So do you see that argument that's in there? And all of these people today that running around looking for the Lord to come back, going to come back, set up his throne in Judah, and all of that, is just absolutely contradictory to the Word of God. Is there any question? Everybody see what we're talking about there? Okay. Let's then move back to Zedekiah. In verse 18, Zedekiah was 21 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Dot, the daughter of so-and-so. 19, and he did that which was evil in the sight of Jehovah. Why is it God going to remove Judah? We're right in the middle of it, isn't it? See, it's evil. See, Hezekiah and Josiah, the only two good kings they had. It said, for though the anger of Jehovah, through the anger of Jehovah did it come to pass in Jerusalem and Judah, until he had cast them out from his presence. And Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. A minute ago I said, remember your first captivity, what did he take? Just some gold and taxes. Second captivity, what did he take? Everything. The king and everybody that amounted to anything, all the skilled labor, everything. So the country just couldn't grow back. Well, in 11 years, only 11 years, Zedekiah thought he was strong enough to withstand Babylon. So he quit paying his taxes. And it came to pass in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, the 10th day of the month, that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came, he and his army, against Jerusalem, and encamped against it, and they built forts against it round about. So the city was besieged unto the 11th year of King Zedekiah. On the 9th day, 4th month, and so forth, there ended up that there was no bread in the land. They didn't have anything to eat. Then a breach was made in the city. All the men of war fled by night out the breach. Let's kind of get a picture of the way wars happen. And we're at Jerusalem now, and Jerusalem would have had the strongest walls of any city in existence. an army would come in this case Babylon. They would come in and they would stand out there about a quarter of a mile away, and they would analyze it. They'd ride their horses around the city, and they'd analyze it. Then sometimes they build a fence all the way around it. Sometimes they didn't. Rome always built a fence around the city, clear around the city. It's interesting how they can do that. It just it boggles your mind when you see these fences. I was reading last night in Josephus, and he was telling about when Rome destroyed Jerusalem. Why, Titus told him to build a fence around it, and the fence was 5 miles long. You know how long it took them to build that fence? Well, I don't know, it was up 30 feet high or something like this. It was a great high fence. 3 days. Boggles your mind. And so they built that thing. Okay, build a wall. Okay, zip, zip. Okay, the wall's built, 30 feet high. Now, if anybody busts out of the walls of Jerusalem, they can't get through our walls. See? We can't get in theirs. They can't get through ours. But we're out here where we got all the food, we got all the water, we got everything. We can bring in instruments of war. We've got everything, and we're going to get them. If all else fails, what guarantees us to win? Starvation. Starvation. May take 3 or 4 years, but we can sit out here, and finally, we can starve them out. Well, they had these big instruments. They had things they called engines. And what they would do is they would build 2 great big poles and put it up there at an apex. Put a rope down here. Go out and cut down a great big tree, about this big around, and tie that tree up in the middle of it with that rope so the tree's just swinging. One end would hang down on the ground. Then they'd get 100 men. They'd all get a hold of that tree, raise it up so they can swing that tree, see? And then they would pull that tree back and run into that wall and swing that tree into that wall, and it'd shake it. Then they'd bring her back again and then run her in there, use these battering rams. And they could tear down walls that were 6, 8, 10 feet thick of solid stone. It just couldn't stand that. And so they would batter it down and make openings. And then when they made openings in there, then they would rush in and go through there. Well, that's what he's talking about. They started doing this. They've got the thing out there now, and they are starving them out. All right. In verse 5, it says, the king, he got out. He ran down by a valley. And the army of the Chaldeans pursued after the king and overtook him in the plains of Jericho, and all his army was scattered from him. Then they took the king and carried him up into the king of Babylon to Riblah, and they gave judgment upon him. That is, had a trial. And they slew the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, and put out the eyes of Zedekiah, bound him in fetters, and carried him to Babylon. They're pretty mad, aren't they? These Babylonians or Chaldeans. See? They're pretty mad. So to show him how disgusted they are, we would have left you here and that, but you keep causing us trouble. So killed his sons before his eyes, then put out his eyes, and that's the last thing that Zedekiah ever saw. Now, this is in 586. This is the 3rd and final captivity. Now, this is important. I want you to remember this date. This date is important. Remember the date for Israel? 722. That's important only just kind of give you a measuring stick there. But this one is important. The reason this one is important is this. That when you go over and you read Jeremiah, Jeremiah prophesies to these Jews, you're going to be destroyed. You're going to be carried into Babylon or Chaldea, two names for the same country. You're going to be carried into that country, and you're going to be there for 70 years. So he names the number of years that they're going to be there. Now, how long will Israel be up in Assyria? Forever. They're gone. They're absorbed in. Now, he said, I'm going now to send you in there, and you will be there for 70 years. Why doesn't God just leave them there? They're not worth bringing out. Christ. See? Now, I'm going to take you in there, and the purpose of taking them in, as they will describe, is to get rid of idolatry. When you come out in 70 years, you're going to be rid of idolatry. Because the way God put it, he said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to take you captive. All I'm going to do is leave the city. That's all I'm going to do. You remember Solomon praying, building the temple, and God said, I'll be with you. My face will be upon this city. I will protect this city. I'll do all of this. Now then, these people went out and they worshiped these idols. So God now says, I'm just going to leave the city, leave you with the idols that you worship. That's all I'm going to do. And we'll see what happens. Babylon's going to come down and conquer you. They're going to take you up there, and I will interfere. I'll intervene. In 70 years, I'll bring you out. And there'll never be any more idolatry in Israel. Well, after 70 years, those people learned a lesson. When they finally are brought out, there's no more idolatry. So this is important. And Jeremiah says it'll be 70 years. Now, he comes down, and this time, he takes everything that's of any value. He just leaves the crippled people there. He just leaves the people that can't walk at all. That's all that's there. He's taken everybody else with him. Now, at this time, he's going to take them and put them in captivity, and they'll be over there 70 years. And there's a guy by the name of Daniel that's here, right here. You see here in chapter 25 and down here in verse 7, or back over here in verse 14. I don't know which one of these captivities it is, probably 14. Is where it is. There's a young man by the name of Daniel. He has three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Nebuchadnezzar brings them into captivity. They come into captivity, and they are so impressive that he elevates them to a high office in his regime to give him advice. Daniel lives there all during the 70-year captivity. So he would have probably been, I don't know, 18 when they took him in. He was a young man. So you name whatever you want to. But whatever that is, then 70 years is going to be in there. One day, Daniel was reading the book of Jeremiah. And Daniel came across the passage in Jeremiah that said 70 years. And the light went on. Now I understand what's going on. He fell to his knees and he prayed to God. God, now I understand. Please forgive us. Please do this. Please. And he prays. And then in the book of Daniel, you read about that story, about how God's preparing then to bring them back. He's going to bring them back. And just, shall we say, accidentally, 70 years later, there was another king that conquered the Babylonians. And this other king was a Persian. His name was Cyrus, which just accidentally Isaiah had talked about 200 years before, when Isaiah said, God will take you captive and Cyrus will let you go. He named the guy. But here it is, just accidentally, this king of the Persians, Cyrus, he takes over, and he said, you know what I think I'm going to do? I think I'm going to just let a lot of these captives go home. I'll just take some of these captives from all these different nations. And so he called in the Jews and he said, I'm going to send you back home. You can go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the city of Jerusalem and rebuild its walls, and I will give you a written statement and pay for it. And you go back. Isn't that something? Just accidentally. Everything worked out just right. That's why I say this is important. 586. You subtract 70 years off of there, and you'll find when the temple is rebuilt again. See, that is what is going to happen. Is in there. Okay, so he takes Zedekiah over. Now there's no more king. No more king whatsoever. Judah is carried out in that year. But look, we got one more thing coming in. Gedaliah. Now, down here in verse 21, it goes ahead and it says, "And so Judah was carried away captive out of the land." Then in 22, "And as for the people that were left of the land of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had left, he made Gedaliah governor." Now, he's not king. He just called this guy up and he said, "Gedaliah, you're going to be the governor. You're going to be the boss." There's not much to boss. All it is just a bunch of people that can't walk, can't get along, but you're the governor. So behave yourself. So Nebuchadnezzar goes home, but there's no more king. Now, Nebuchadnezzar did another thing. He told his captains, he said, "I've heard of a man by the name of Jeremiah who has been prophesying to these people in Judah, and he's been telling them to give up because their God is going to turn him over to us. He's been on our side. See? And so you go ask him what he wants to do, and whatever he wants to do, you let him do. Everybody else, right into captivity they go." So they went to Jeremiah and they said, "Do you want to go with us? We'll treat you nice over there. Or do you want to stay here with all of these crippled people?" And he said, "I want to stay here in the land." So he stayed there. So when he stayed there, he is back there now. And so Gedaliah, who is the governor, finally then, down in verse 26, he starts getting the people together. And he says, "We don't trust the Babylonians. We're going to go down to Egypt." He said, we're going to escape, and we're all going down there. And Jeremiah pleaded, "Don't go down there. Don't go down there." And he was pleading with them. And so they kidnapped him and said, "You're going too." And they took Jeremiah down to Egypt. He went down there, and that's where he died. Sad story. See, as you see the end of it as it came about. Thus you come to the end then of no Judah. Judah now is off into Babylonian captivity. All right. From here on, then we will go back now and we'll start studying the prophets. We'll go back and the next time begin studying Hosea and Amos and Micah and those men that are back there. And what do you expect out of them now? See, you've got a good viewpoint, a good overall viewpoint. The prophets, when we study a prophet that goes to Israel, he goes up to preach to Israel. What do you expect him to say? Oh boy, woe unto you, repent or else. Boy, it's going to be tough preaching, you see. And so that's what you can expect out of these guys. And when they make a lot of these statements, horrible statements, just statements that gives you shivers, you understand why they're doing it. Because they're trying to save the people from being lost into captivity. So that's where we will go then to get into there.